Thank you, Mayor. Is this on? I can't tell.
You got to get it close, pretty close.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this wonderful day and all of the people that have come to listen to us today at the work session. Lord, we ask thee to make sure that we make the right decisions for the citizens of North Ogden and that we can all do so in a civil manner. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilmember Pulver. We'll now move forward with our agenda. Council, based upon our agenda tonight, does anyone have a conflict of interest they'd like to disclose? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 2, which is an action to approve the March 12th, 2024 City Council meeting minutes. Do we have such a motion?
Mayor, I move that we approve March 12th, 2024 City Council meeting minutes.
Thank you.
Second.
Councilmember Severing. Thank you, Councilmember Pulver. Are there any corrections or additional discussion? All in favor of approving the City Council meeting minutes of March 12th, 2024, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Brian, we really appreciate your timeliness of this. I remember sometimes we were 2 months behind approving the minutes, so thank you for the good job you're doing there. Okay, we're going to move on now and have a discussion or an action to approve the selection of the 2024 Community Emergency Response Team City Council Member Liaison, which would be me asking someone to do it. And Councilmember Barker, would you be able to do that for us? Since you're kind of in that arena of things?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
All right. So Councilmember Barker has graciously, with great enthusiasm, accepted the request by the mayor to serve in that capacity. Does anyone have any questions or other suggestions? All right, then I would look for a motion to approve Councilmember Ryan Barker as our Community Emergency Response Team member, be the liaison there. Could I get a motion on that?
Mayor, I move that we approve Ryan Barker as our Community Emergency Response Team City Council Member Liaison.
Thank you, Councilmember Dalpaz. Do we have a second to that motion?
I second.
Is that you, Councilmember Severing? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the issue? All in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We'll move on to our active agenda now, and we'll seek public comments. Those who would like to comment, please step up to the podium. Please state your name, and if you're a resident of North Ogden, Utah, and please keep your comments to no longer than 5 minutes. And John, did we get internet service then? Do we have people online?
Yep. You can see we do have one person, Susan Kilborn, attending or watching online.
All right. If Susan has a comment, if you'd let us know, we'd appreciate it. Okay.
My name is Karen Sunderland. I am a North Ogden City resident. I just want to ask if the mayor and city council have had the opportunity to schedule training with Lisa Schwartz for the FEMA training that city councils are encouraged. I don't know if they're required, but they're really encouraged to get that training in case of emergency. Lisa said she is willing to come and present it in 2 one-hour trainings prior to a city council meeting. That is what she has been doing with other cities in Weber County. And I would like to encourage you all to consider that as soon as you can, get that worked in. The training is so good. I went through the CERT training last year, and my husband Merrill has also been through it, but she's had some excellent training that she does with mayors and city councils, and I would just like to encourage you to get that on your agenda if you, as soon as possible, so you can get that.
John, I think some council members have gone through FEMA training that's been provided before, haven't they?
In the past, I'm not sure if any sitting council members have, although Ryan probably has through the fire
And
department.
Councilmember Dalpaz, I think.
Okay.
So obviously we have 3 or 4 of us that haven't been trained. So if you would check with Ryan, our city recorder, on getting a time for that, and we'll see what we can do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Susan Kilborn does have her hand up, Mayor.
All right, Susan.
Hi, Susan Kilborn. I just would like to kindly ask John if on Zoom he would switch the screen so that we, or I guess, since I seem to be the only one out here at this time, so we can see the faces of people there. We've got some presentations coming up, and also during public comments, it's nice to be able to see people. And besides that, I love to see my city council and their smiling faces. So if you do that, John, I'd love you for it.
Okay.
Yay!
All right, thanks, Susan. Okay, with that, we'll move on to item number 5 on our agenda this evening. This is a discussion on the amphitheater at Barker Park operating plan. I asked John to put this on the agenda. I think now with the lights and the sound system and things the council have done, we need a plan to get the amphitheater used. I believe we're going to have to probably be aggressive in inviting people. I don't think we're going to be necessarily utilizing that to its capacity, waiting for people to call us. So I just thought we ought to have an operating plan on what we're going to do, how we're going to utilize that, what its purpose is, so that we can, move forward and utilize that in the best way we can. Surely the council's call, you've heard me call it a community gathering place where we can gather people in our community and hopefully get our community a little bit tighter together. But we needed to make that determination. So John, why don't you go ahead with your presentation? But I did ask John to put this on so that we can figure out how we can best utilize that.
Okay, thanks, Mayor. As many of you might know, the internet is down. And so we're using a hotspot here underneath the table that's keeping our Zoom running, but for some reason my laptop just lost access to all the files that we were planning on sharing tonight. So hopefully it'll come back up here soon. Bryce isn't around. So the hard part is that means that the wireless in this room isn't talking to our servers right now. So fun stuff. So if you'll remember from your packets, I can actually, while I'm talking a little bit, I can turn this hotspot on my phone and probably at least get us to the packets. But so the amphitheater is something that we've been talking about, for several years now. And I think that we're at a point, probably past a point, where it'd be really nice to get some clear direction from the council on how you would like to see this, see the facility used moving forward. In the plan that was shown to the council in the packet, it showed that multitasking. But the goal was kind of centered around community focused activities. It didn't preclude the idea of an outside show coming in, but with that facility, the way it's currently situated, it's really kind of lends itself well to things like the luau that we did, potentially movies in the park, a bunch of recitals, dance things. I know last year they did a ballet of Panning, like Peter Panning or something. some things like that, those kind of activities. And with the sound and AV equipment finalized, and we're getting our training on next week, it's a good time to start talking about what direction the council wants us to go as far as helping this facility be successful. We've got some staff, for example, that have probably enough time during the day, periodically, that they could call places that do dances, cause I know Tractors and Tiaras, I'm not sure still does dance, based on what I last heard, but call groups like that and say, hey, look, we have this facility, would you be interested in coming to use it? But if we're going to do that, then we need some direction on how the council what money the council wants to charge for that facility. In our current fee schedule, we've got it kind of set up in a way that the residents get a discount and nonprofits get a discount, but individuals who are not one of those two groups would be paying I think it's double, not double. It's really the residents get a discount is the way to see it, as opposed to charging non-residents more. But the idea is that what we're charging people is in some way based on what we're trying to motivate to be there. And so just maybe a good conversation for the council to have in this work session is to talk about your thoughts and feelings on what you'd like to see there, and if there's ways you have that you'd like to incentivize people to use the facility. And work sessions are more kind of back and forth in conversations. I don't really want to talk the whole night. But so what are some of your thoughts about the facility use, and then what your goals are for recouping costs over there? The last 4 years that we've been tracking the facility, we've essentially broken even on the amount of money we've generated through the few rentals we've had has covered the utilities. And so it wouldn't have any long-term roof replacement numbers in it or things like that, but it's essentially keeping the lights on. With the additional stuff that's included over there, the cost will go up a little bit to keep the facility running, but not a lot. For the lights, for example, are all LED lights, so they're not the old halogens that draw a lot of power. But there will be some additional maintenance on the AV system, in the sense that a microphone will get dropped or just wear out because they're used, for longer. So what are some thoughts the council has? And if you'll talk for a little second, then I'll finish getting the rest of this stuff up on the screen so that residents can see the operating plan and what we're talking about.
Councilmember Pulver.
Just like you're talking about, I think that the key thing is keeping whatever plan we talk about is realistic and reachable. And I think a lot of what you've been talking about in the plan, and you'll go through it, is, having a goal that you set for each year and kind of projecting out. And I think that was kind of a huge thing. And I think one of the things that I think the council needs to decide is how, because two things I think for the amphitheater that I can kind of understand is one, the safety of any large group, and then the second part is the parking. I know those have been two ginormous, well, not ginormous, but issues that I've seen and heard about from residents. And I think beyond that, I think the other big thing is enlisting smart people. And I put that in air quotes because I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I mean, there's been, just off the top of my head, I mean, we've been looking at Layton. Obviously, Sandy has a ginormous one. And and then Ogden, obviously, but we're not talking scale at all. I mean, we're not even close to any one of those, but I think, everybody's in their infancy at this stage. And I think making sure that we talk to the right people is kind of important as well. But I think this is the start that we needed, and I think to get the ball rolling, but making sure that we talk about those two other priorities is kind of a key thing for this, at least to me anyways. I talk long enough?
Well, to your question, Councilman Pulver, I know Christine and I have talked to Mark Daniels. Do you want to report on that?
Sure. Maybe you know more than I do, but I had run into him and asked him if he would ever do I don't know, some kind of production again, like he did once on this island. And he said that he wouldn't be opposed to that. But this summer he is otherwise engaged. So he recommended another director that might be interested. And I called her and she said, not at this time. And so I just kind of told Mark Daniels that she said no. And I said, well, hey, keep us in mind if you ever have a free summer and it works out, we would love it. Me personally and my family is when I say we, if you came back with a production. And so I personally hope that we can have more events like that bring out the whole community. And, even if it's a play where there's a small fee per ticket to come in and see it, things that bring the community together in that way, in addition to the private groups who pay a good fee to have their, their Christmas work party or whatever it is there. I'd like to see more community events where everyone is invited as well.
Councilmember Pulver?
And one other thing, that the Arts Guild, I think that was something in the plan as well, which that kind of hit me. And if you look at all the other ones as well, especially the Davis, is it Arts Guild? Arts something, anyways. But that's kind of what I say runs it, but organizes it. And it's not necessarily the city itself or the county that does it. It's more that runs the show. And I think if we start leaning into that a little bit harder, I think that's going to help at least bear some of the burden off of staff and maybe more on the, I don't want to say citizens, but definitely somebody that knows, like you're saying, trying to find people and, a director, et cetera. So.
Can I give you a little feedback on that?
Sure.
We had one organized at the time and both of the co-chairs resigned because they could not get any agreement of the people involved in that. So, I thought we had two pretty good folks that were looking out of that, but they couldn't get an agreement amongst the folks on the approach to take. So we might be able to reinstitute that if we can outline what the expectations are for its usage. I think that probably caused some circular discussions because there really wasn't an understanding of what was expected there. There were some that expected, there was a wide range. For those who are new on the council too, and I can't remember if Councilmember Dalpaz was here, but we've had people want to use it for free. I'll give an example. I think it was for a choir. Correct me if I'm wrong, John, but I believe that was turned down because it wasn't open to all citizens. It was kind of a tryout basis. And then you had to pay to be in the choir. And so the council said, no, its usage has to be, available for anybody that wants to participate, as I recall.
Yeah, and I think they could have rented the facility. They were asking for a discount, and we said, we're not going to discount it because it's not just free and open for everybody. Yeah. And so, council, this on your screen, in front of you kind of shows the three groups of ideas or kind of goals that were in the business plan. And obviously this is eventually going to be a council business plan. So anything in here that we need to tweak, but the idea would be probably heavily focused, especially if you look down here on the number of private events, would be private events, which would fall under these categories of piano recitals, dance recitals, family events, and other events. So not necessarily private in that only a limited group is allowed to attend, but they're put on by private individuals would be the goal, as opposed to the city partnered event or the city sponsored events. And I think that what the mayor just said, I think is correct. And that is, we've never forced the council to give really clear guidance on this facility. And that has led to a little bit of the spinning of the wheels for those involved. And so some really clear guidance from you, it doesn't have to come tonight, but moving forward is going to be very helpful in saying, our goal is dance recitals or in piano recitals, then like I said, I think we've got some staff time. We can have people call every piano teacher in town and say, hey, we've got this facility, come use it. And if the council's agreeable, we could say, $50 or $100 or pick a number, and we can have them use it so that people start attending and start seeing the facility. And then eventually someday that'll lead into, actually probably charging enough to cover everything that we need to cover there. So.
John, just a question. I don't recall anywhere in the budget where we have for lack of a better term, a sinking fund, knowing that, there's going to be repairs needed there. In fact, I don't think we finished when I asked you about there's a gap between the top there that seems an ideal place for birds to nest, but what is our plan there too? I guess the council needs to address that. Long-term, how are we going to maintain, the facility? Is that anywhere in our plans at this point?
We don't currently have a sinking fund or I'd call it a capital investment or reinvestment fund for this. The best example is the roof is a membrane roof, which are good for a long time. Ryan could probably tell us more since he knows the roofing industry better, but they do eventually wear out and it will be expensive to replace when it does. One of the things that we did in the design of the facility is we tried to not do a lot of painted materials on the outside or things that would need updating and replacement. It doesn't mean the facility will be maintenance free, but most of the stuff we expect to break in the next 20 years will be inside, plumbing, electrical, things like that. And that would just fall under our normal building maintenance fund. But for those big things, eventually the concrete will wear out and crack and need to be replaced around the facility. And so there's things like that just need to be done. And this current plan as proposed would not generate enough money, in my opinion, to replace those things, and replace the concrete in 50 years, for example. And so that's something that we need to have on our radar, is trying to close that gap as best we can. And there are some other resources. The ramp tax is up for election this year or next year. And so that is, that paid for 60% of this facility, or 50% or give or take. But so that might help, but those monies are typically not available to redo something that's already there. It's there for an expansion or an enhancement. And so it might just fall completely on the city in 50 years to replace concrete that needs to be replaced, like we currently do with parking lots and things in the rest of the city.
I would think that we could just incorporate it in that parking lot plan. It sounds like there's already a plan in place for that. If not, then, just as we have our playground equipment replaced every 20 years or whatever it is, we can insert it in that plan too, where we set aside money now for 50 years, even though it's not today's money. I personally am really a fan of the work that you've already put together on this operating plan. It looked really good to me. I don't know what comparables to rent facilities are right now, but it seemed like these were reasonable prices. And, I'd be interested to know what piano teachers and dance recitals are currently using, what facilities and what they're paying for that. And if this is something that is a good option. But otherwise, I think it's a great plan to try to increase our usage a little bit each year. I would also say my opinion is that, if I opened a business tomorrow, I would probably have different prices now than I would in like a long-term perspective. And so if there was, discounts now that we don't plan to keep always, but just something that will bring people in and will show people that we're good to work with, and it's a successful opportunity for them. I feel like we could rework this budget, not budget, but
Fee schedule?
yeah, fee schedule. I feel like we could rework it as years go on if we need to. But right now we're trying to get, that marketing. And so even if that means that we have lower fees now is what my idea was. Then I think that it would be worth it to get the marketing and the name out there and get people willing and hooked and like it, and then increase our prices as the supply and demand the business needs.
Yes, I was thinking about Councilman Pulver's thoughts at the beginning. He mentioned, I think one of his things that he's concerned about is parking. And I think when we have big events there, clearly that is an issue. Something that will serve a good dual purpose hopefully in the 2 to 3 year timeline, or maybe a little bit later. If you've been paying attention to the Barker Park Committee, we've been talking about the island section of Barker Park, which is basically that northeast area of the park. There will be a parking lot there. I don't know how many stalls exactly, but it will be several stalls to help with a little bit of the congestion that happens there. I think for major events, that will only be slightly helpful, but it will help. So I think that's something that we could look at for within the next 2, 3, 4 years, place that into one of these upcoming budgets. So we have, even if the entire island section of the Barker Park is not completed at that time, I mean, having a parking lot there would be helpful for these type of things.
Chicken Coop Trail has some parking lot too behind the amphitheater. So
Yeah, that's a good point.
I don't know how many it was. It's maybe 20 tops.
That's a good point. And John, is it pretty walkable to go down from the Chicken Coop new parking that's going to be down there to get? Yeah, I guess. Yeah,
Around.
that's an option.
Yeah, people
Didn't-
could walk
didn't even think of that.
around the amphitheater.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, people once upon this island, we had the people park at Wadman and walk down who were in this show. So, or their parents would drop them off, or people would drop them off because there just wasn't enough parking for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think we had 80 kids in the show or something. It was a lot. Not that they're drivers, but And the current rule is for ticketed events, which most of them haven't been ticketed. It's 1 stall for every 4 tickets. So we can sell 505 tickets or 502 tickets for activities right now.
Is there a possibility we could identify some activity we could go after and try to get them to come in? I think, word of mouth, I think about going down and freezing in the middle of the winter down at the Ogden Amphitheater with the Utah Dance Academy or whoever it is. I mean, it's packed. Parents like to come and see their kids dance. I mean, there's a lot of dance companies around. I think we've got to identify who we're going to invite to utilize the facility and get it started. Anybody else have any ideas on particular groups we could encourage to come and use it? Councilmember Watson.
I know I spoke with Tiffany Staley this week and asked her what her previous experiences were in planning events. And she had, I know, just right before she left with the city, a pretty big name musical artist lined up, and it fell through because her position wasn't, I think what she was saying was if we had some kind of secure help that was constant and consistent there, someone who maybe was a booker who was trying to engage and advertise and recruit all these different activities, someone who was trained on the facility, someone who was more permanent there and experienced there. That was her recommendation, that things would come off without a hitch and there'd be less hoops to jump through. and I'm not saying that we have to go that route, but I'm just saying that I think there were a lot of options that were many months, maybe even years in the works, that maybe those ties aren't lost and those doors aren't closed, and we could still pursue some of those same, if we were willing to research and get that information out of her or others who were, constantly, that was on their mind. So I know that when we, at some point, my personal opinion is if this is going to be something that brings an income to the city, I think we are going to have to be proactive on the recruiting, whatever that means, whether that's an employee that kind of takes ownership over that, or someone who's trained who does other jobs as well. But I think there were a lot of options from outside the city, not local options, that were in the works. So maybe if there was research done there, we could still use those opportunities.
John?
There is a group, they're based at near Five Points, I think. But they do a theater. It's a small theater production company. And they would come use the stage if as soon as it's available. I think her name's Megan, but she's reached out to me a couple times to see when it's ready to go and things like that. Yeah.
Give me a number, I'll call her.
Councilmember Delpaz?
At a previous employer, we had a annual sales kickoff type of thing at the Ogden Amphitheater. So our company rented it out, and it was, there could be some potential there if we made some calls around to local companies. It was kind of a cool, different setting. It put off a different feeling for our meeting. So I think that would be a cool idea to call down a list of local companies that might be interested in that type of thing.
Councilmember Pulver?
So with the Mayor Taylor Foundation chairs, how many total chairs do we have now? Is it like close to 200 or 300?
If you include the metal ones, I think with the 300 they're providing will be near 600.
Okay, so quite a bit. Okay. Because I still think one of the, I think we're too, I'll say infant, but not far enough along to hire somebody. I think if there's someone that is free, I want to think one of the key things here. And that's why I think I'm every time I think about it, the more I want to push the Arts Guild and see if there's people that want to, take, with some direction from council to run, because I know Cherry Days, I know, there's a lot of people on the budget committee that just, gnashing at the teeth to propose things. And I'm like, great, so I would assume, I know there's at least several, just talking with other people that would be more than happy to take that on and tackle it. And so I don't know if that's even an option, but to me, that's kind of the first start. We can have staff do stuff, but I think the next thing is also, the protocols thereof, making sure that council doesn't need to make direction, but at the same time, they have to give the direction of what that Arts Guild is. It's almost like a what do you call it? Mission statement, and a kind of what we had for budget committee, what they're tasked to do, go and do. And as long as we have that, I think, like you said, it might avoid the circular argument that they were having on the previous one. Maybe.
Okay.
So.
Councilmember Severing?
Yeah, John, I'm kind of interested. What do we have? Do we have schedules already? Do we have activities already scheduled for the amphitheater? I mean, like last year they did, was it concerts in the park on like Mondays, or?
That was 2 years ago.
That was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So we have much planned this? Not yet, huh?
No, not. I mean, we do have the stuff around Cherry Days, so the luau and things like that. And then I haven't checked the schedule to see who's renting it, but the community band also has a few performances they do during the summer, and then the Veterans Day or the Veterans Week program.
John, where, I'm a little bit fuzzy on this, but I don't recall us ever having a budget for a big name. Because obviously you know, you pay for that out of the budget, right? Whether you break even or not, but we probably ought to, if that's the goal of the council, we probably ought to have a budget for that. I think we have an activities budget. We get the 22,000 from ramp, and then we have some other situations there. But if that's the plan too, that needs to be put into the budget, having come from a situation similar to Councilmember Dalpaz. You know, at our annual meeting, we used to have people come and, you know, it's a $25,000. I mean, for low range folks, it's $25,000 to get them here. So if that's the, I don't know if that's the intention of the council or whatever, but if it is, it ought to be budgeted at the appropriate time. I'm not saying that's this year or whatever, but I think we need to understand that, you know, there's two things: you can rent it and have people take on the responsibility of putting on the event, or if the city puts on the event, you know, they take the risk and the cost, which is, if that's what the direction the council wants to head, that's surely their call. But I don't recall us ever having that in our budget.
No, I don't know if someone, I wasn't aware of that person, so they might have been planning on doing their own event. You know, where a promoter would come and rent the facility and bring somebody in. I think the two biggest names we've had at the facility is Ryan Shoup without the rubber band. So, because he does perform just by himself. And then we also had, he was in Osmond. David Osmond came. So those were the two kind of biggest, and then the Well Pennies, but all of those were three independent or free events where the city was using the Music Mondays money to hire those people to come in.
Councilmember Watson?
I think that's the beauty of having a partnership event. You know, you find some kind of sponsor, an insurance company or something, and then they bring out the artist, pay, you know, decide the ticket price, invite the whole community, and we're supporting them. Maybe there's discounts involved. But that, I mean, whatever you want to call it, whether it's sponsored or partnered, or I feel like the burden then doesn't lay on the city, but it's still an opportunity for all community members to participate and enjoy that, bring everyone together. So I think there would need to be some proactive measures taken to find those partnerships, those companies, the private companies that are willing to pay those fees, but vision, I guess, not necessarily something we could do overnight.
Councilmember Severing.
Yes, I haven't talked to Councilwoman Watson about this. We really don't have a guild in place. Wonder if the council was agreeable to it, and Councilwoman Watson was interested. Oh boy. I'm waiting for her to look at me like, wonder if you and I kind of work together and
happy
get
to
some
help.
things up and functioning.
I'd be happy to help.
So can I ask for an appointment before us, Councilwoman Watson and I, to do that?
So what is the request to start an arts guild with you two kind of heading it up? Is that
Liaison,
what
right?
I'm hearing here?
Yeah. I mean, I sat down here and wrote down a bunch of theaters. I don't know if they would want to come this way, but it might be something. I mean, we've got Ziegfeld, we've got the Bonneville Terrace, we've got John mentioned Megan at the Ogden Theater, Perry Theater. We might have some of them who might want to actually come and do a play. I don't know. The answer is always no unless you ask.
True. So is this, you just kind of taking this on, or do you want to start
I'm
an arts
more than
guild?
happy to take it on. If Councilwoman Watson is willing, I'm willing.
Let's do it.
Okay, we'll do it.
Okay. Sounds good.
And then at some point, I mean, we can do it now, or we could wait and see how things go, but we probably want to make it an official committee, because then right now the council is currently the cultural committee for the city. And so if we were going to transition that over to the Arts Guild, then we just need to make it official.
Well, why don't Councilmember Watson and Severing make some suggestions of people that could serve on the guild, and then we can officially, let's see what we can come up with of interest, and we can proceed along with an official appointment.
I would also gin up a quick mission statement, what to do real fast. I mean, it doesn't have to be, less than a page.
Councilmember Watson?
I am curious if the guild has to be a committee. And the reason I say that is because if a guild chose to meet really regularly or wanted to plan an event, let's say, it would tie their hands. They would have to, make it complicated for them if every meeting that they held had to be recorded and in a public space such as this. But if it was just an arts guild that was a citizen-run arts guild, similar to, I was just on the North Ogden Parks and Trails, which is a committee run by citizens. It is not a city-sponsored committee. Then I feel like they would be able to run further. Am I wrong? Is there a difference there?
The big thing would be then
No spending money.
the informal arts guild couldn't authorize expenditure of any monies. So anything that was suggested would come to the council for approval in a full discussion.
But shouldn't that happen anyway? Or is that what this?
Well, so in theory, like the Cherry Days Committee is a good example where they're not an official and they come to the council and say, this is our budget. And so it's just kind of making sure that it's clear guidance from the council on what the boundaries are. But it'd be really hard for that committee, for example, and I think to establish partnerships and do things without running them through the council, because, and we'll talk about this third on tonight, but I don't think the guild could say, hey, the city will sponsor this. It would be more of a, hey, let's go ask the council if they're willing to sponsor this. So it just have to be made sure it's operated the correct way. But it's possible for sure to do it that way.
To do it without it being a city sponsor. Because I think my vision was not to create a guild right now. It was just for you and I to maybe get together and find some people that might want to be part of the theater. So, I mean, we're not talking about going out and probably getting somebody that we have to pay $10,000.
So, John, didn't you say that we have staff willing to find and recruit people to rent out the amphitheater?
I don't know about willing.
Okay.
I said there's a few staff that have some downtime.
Yeah.
And I think we could say, hey, here's some phone numbers, call them and say, hey, North Ogden has this new facility.
Not that I'm against what you're saying.
But I don't know if they'd have a passion for it or not. One of them I know did do theater in high school.
Yeah.
And so they might have a passion.
I mean, I'm happy to help with that. I'm happy to help come up with a guild, an arts guild too. I'm just trying to figure out if it were a city, like, for example, I'm sorry, I'm going through all of this in my head, but this is a work session, right? Similar to this budget committee that is city sponsored, and everything that they say has to be with a mic and recorded and accessible, right? This budget committee isn't going to be making financial decisions on their own. They're still going to be bringing everything back to the council for approval or for recommendation. And so I guess in my mind, I was thinking that this arts guild is going to have to communicate quite often with the city as well. And so I don't know which way is easier, but I'm happy to help Councilman Severing to recruit people or to find an arts guild or to find an official arts guild committee. Either way, I'm just trying to brainstorm which is the best route here.
Councilmember Dalpaz, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I would say once you recruit the members of this guild, definitely I would suggest having an official committee. And part of the reason I suggest that is there's going to be a lot of interested citizens that will want to follow things very closely on what's happening with it. There's people that are very interested in what's going to happen with the amphitheater in the next few years. So I think it would be good to have something recorded, something on the record, something official. Part of the problem that we had with part of the reason I believe that we spun up the Barker Park Committee again was because we had a committee back in 2015 or so that had all these great plans, and they did put together a presentation, and it was out there, but we don't have a record of meetings and minutes. So there might have been some components to that were lost. So I think that would be helpful, even though in a way it makes it more difficult because then you don't have as much flexibility. But then it just 100% ensures that there is a record of it no matter what.
So at this point in time, if I understand this right, the initial step is for Councilmember Watson and Councilmember Severing to try to go out and recruit, see what the level of interest is in utilizing that, contacting some people, whether, specific folks, and see if we can't start generating that. And then from there, if we need, I think RAMP requires us, John, to have
If you apply for arts and if you apply for the arts grant, then you need to have a cultural community
Yeah.
council.
So, and I think Davis County, they have the Davis Arts Council, which is an organized 501c3. I think they came and talked to us how they got things kind of going, and so maybe putting in a call to them to get some advice again might be helpful. So is that where we're at then on this? Is you're going to go out and kind of see maybe who's using amphitheaters around, what the costs are, and then seeing what we can attract into the amphitheater? Is that where we're at? Councilmember Dalpaz?
I was also going to say, when you mentioned that in the future, maybe in the next couple of years or whatever, that money is suggested to help go towards whatever events that might want to be brought in, it made me nervous. It made me hesitant. So I think we're just at the baby steps phases. We don't worry about putting $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 towards events or whatever it ends up being. I'm not even ready to start talking about that yet. So let's do the guild, let's get things going, and then let's talk.
I think it's
know what I mean?
important to know, we do have historically, I think the money we receive from RAMP, the dollar per citizen we have, was historically used to do music in the park.
Yeah.
Those things. So, maybe during the budgeting process, that needs to be addressed, is what money, because I think you said, John, it's just been sitting there kind of this year.
Yeah.
And so what is the use of that going to be? Is that something that ought to be utilized for seed money to get things rolling, to have some events there, because the money's budgeted, and I think we have to kind of use it for those type of things, don't we, John? Basically, isn't that the expectation when they give us the money?
Yeah, and in fact, we send a report back at the end of the year that says, here's how we spent the money. And so what we've been doing last year, we did have enough things that were kind of planned. And so we were able to say, okay, these are the things we spent it on. But this year, we're going to have to kind of go back into the budget and say, okay, look, these are the things that we're going to really use that money on because they meet the qualifications for RAMP dollars, as opposed to planning ahead and saying we're doing music in the park or things like that.
And I think, marketing is going to have to take place. I was surprised when we had David Osmond come, who's very well known. And I thought the Parks and Rec folks did great advertising on that. And still, would we have 150 people or something, John, or 200? I mean, it was underwhelming, I guess.
It was not as good as the first year we did music in the park with COVID going on, because people couldn't do anything else. And so we had like quadrants, and we got more people there than we did for anything else.
Yeah.
I think the best we've had was Ryan Shoup is the one we've had the most attendance on.
I think the basis we need to remember as we seek is to make that a community gathering place, right? And enjoying the community in getting kind of to know more about the city, more about each other. So as we seek that, I think that's the ultimate goal. If we agree this is a community gathering place, the type of events that we're talking about to get things rolling, that we ought to make sure we organize it to the fact that we're getting people together. So,
And I misunderstood you before about what you said about the funding in the future. I'm totally good with that ramp money, the $1 per resident that goes towards that.
Yeah.
That's
So-
very reasonable.
okay,
And I think, like you said, there is a ramp, if I read this right, municipal ramp program. But there also was an amphitheater program line item that hasn't been funded for a couple of years, like John was saying. And so if that's, because there are a lot of things that we use the ramp programs for, if we want to specifically target the amphitheater for certain programs, then we need to, I don't know, split out in my mind and on the yellow sheet as to what we're talking about for the ramp programs. Because if there is a separate item for amphitheater programs and we don't fund it, I know it's only the yellow sheets don't go out more to the public than anything else, but if it's something we want to do, that's something we need to make sure that's,
yeah, and that's, I
Budgeted
guess
correct.
what I'm saying is, we haven't really talked about the use of that funds for a couple of years, and I think probably in the budgeting process this year. I don't know if you're talking about, there's a line item that had 30,000 of revenue. That was based upon the expense and the revenue were based upon, there is a separate line item, I think.
I'm
in the
just
budget
looking
somewhere.
at this is the expense, which I'm sure is, because it's 21,528, which to
Yeah.
me is the,
It's the one the mayor's
population.
mentioning. It was when we did the show. So we did Once on This Island, that was that line. And 2 years before that, when we did Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, it was that line. And basically the revenues from the ticket sales and the sponsorships offset the cost.
yeah. And I guess that's the thing is just to make sure that people understand that so that, and that's the huge thing, the budget committee, I mean, such an eye-opening event because you see all these expenses, but you don't see the other side. Like, oh, you're buying a new truck every year. Good heavens, but no, it's a net zero because anyway,
Yeah.
not going to get into that, but yeah. So as long as, and I was just looking at, some of the other budget lines for the parks and rec and stuff like that, really, it's being mowed, it's being dressed and all those things that, it's already being done. But like you said, the building maintenance doesn't really call it out in the general government buildings line, but maybe we do that. Maybe that's something you add to it so that you can track it very visibly, to make it completely transparent on for each citizen to look at it and see, because, you got pool or motor pool cleaning services, that's how detailed you're getting in there. So to me, that's something that we should probably, because senior center, anyway, just a thought on that as well.
Okay, what else, John, are you looking for this evening from the council?
I maybe a commitment to go through the operating plan and refine that mission statement to be the goal of the council. Because then staff and, the kind of, call it the baby art skill at this point, can use that language for maybe the next 6 to 8 months to help put things into that facility. And then I think we will come back with the discussion on budget as well for, in fact, actually, we'll talk about it in 2 items a little bit on budget for partner sponsorship and supporting events and things like that. So we can re-hit that in 10 minutes, right?
Whatever time, I just want to make sure you're getting the direction you're looking for
Yeah,
here.
that's huge. Is if we can get the mission statement approved by the council, then that will give anyone who's trying to help that facility some direction on where to go.
Are you looking for a motion? I'd be happy to make a motion. I think it was great what you wrote.
So we won't take any action tonight.
Okay.
So, but we could bring it back at a future council meeting
Do we
as an
need
action
to?
item.
I think the key is we've made the investment in to get that ready to use, right? And so let's get it used somehow.
Yeah.
So anything else? John, council? If not, we'll move on to the next item, which is the North Pole celebration, discussion on safety and processes for the North Pole celebration at Barker Park, also presented by City Manager and Attorney John Call.
So I had an amazing PowerPoint presentation that was animated, and no, I'm kidding, but I did have one built, but it's in my files, which are on the server and we can't get to. So in this topic of conversation on North Pole, I've kind of looked at three things that the council needs to talk about and maybe be aware of, because it is an event that we've been doing for 5 years now, I believe, with various partners and degrees. And we need to, it's grown big enough that there's some things we need to do now. So for the first thing I've grouped as people. There are certain things we need to do now because we're having so many people show up that we need to be filling out a mass gathering permit, making sure we've got adequate sanitation facilities. And then we've even talked about some things with information booths or something to kind of help people navigate it a little bit better, as well as additional potential partnership or sponsorships. Morgan Sutherland, who's been helping us with this as our contract provider for our events, has been phenomenal at getting sponsors to sponsor the cookies or sponsor certain components of it that have really reduced the cost on the city, the burden. And so that's been really good. But I think, for example, on mass gathering permits, as soon as you hit a peak crowd of 1,000 people, you need to have a mass gathering permit from the county. And while there are times of the night when we don't have 1,000 people, when the show at the amphitheater ends and that group is leaving and another group's coming in, we're probably exceeding that 1,000 people. And so we need to do the mass gathering permit just to make sure we're covered. And then that will also include, from our perspective, and if the council's okay, probably some overtime shifts for officers to be there on site and present. Just that kind of delves into the next item. I know Councilmember Watson had a question.
I talked to Morgan this week and she said she does fill out the health department's permit when she has the North Pole event.
Okay.
And she also has a required amount of bathrooms that need to be there, and she does that as well. And she also, I don't think that the health department required this, but she coned off several stalls in the parking area near the reindeer for emergencies as well, even though I don't think that was required. But I did talk to her this week and she has been getting the permit.
That's good. I know I talked to her last year, but
Okay.
I wasn't aware
Okay.
she had actually got it. So that's good news because,
Okay.
yeah. And then that delves into the safety component. So I met with the fire marshal and he can speak for himself, but we talked about a few things to help, particularly if there's an emergency. A couple of things we talked about was obviously having officers on site, one or two, doing some traffic control, potentially turning the parking lot into a one-way traffic situation during the event so that people can only come in one way and go out the other. We talked about potentially doing that for the surrounding streets as well, again, just during the event. So it'd only be from the 5 to 8 or what every night. And then having a first aid station and things like that. But, now we're talking about resources, right? First aid station, I'm sure we could find a sponsor, Mountain Star and IHC and others would probably sponsor a night, or local, Lee's might sponsor a first aid station. But there's also potential to not only impact us, but, Northview comes to our Cherry Days and they don't charge us extra for having an ambulance at Cherry Days. And so there's just some things like that the council may want to talk about. But again, this is all kind of under this umbrella of, are we happy with the event? Do we want to keep doing it? Sort of a thing. I think staff enjoys it, at least the park staff enjoys setting it up, participating in it. They don't like the taking it down as much, ironically, but yeah. And then the third component, if there's no questions about safety, is the legal component. So we get this question every year, which is, how is the city allowed to hold an event or sponsor an event which includes a religious component or religious components, you might say, because we display a menorah during the event, and then the Hunt family does their live nativity during the event. And this is where I really wish I had my slides because I had things a little more organized. But the establishment clause is tied to the freedom of religion and the First Amendment stuff that people talk about. But essentially it says that the government will not establish an official religion. And so that's the concern that typically has been raised by individuals, is by having or by allowing the Hunt family to come and do their event, partnered or participating in the North Pole, are we establishing a religion or showing a preference to a religion? I mentioned we do have a menorah up there. And I think based on my review of the case law, it's always a little wishy-washy because it's so fact specific. But I think the council is fairly safe where we're at, but that doesn't mean that we wouldn't get a challenge or that we wouldn't have to fight a legal battle if the council chose to, meaning if someone wanted to sue us, that we wouldn't be able to just avoid court. And I do think that because of that activity, if any other group wanted to come to the North Pole and provide a religiously themed holiday experience, we would have to tell them yes as well. I think from the staff perspective, we'd say yes. In fact, I keep trying to find someone to hold a Yule celebration as part of this, right? Because Yule is a holiday themed activity. It's not just a log, it's an actual thing. But if someone was willing to do that, that would actually help provide additional protection for the city, because now you're not just there's not just one religion on highlight, but we, or if the local synagogue or, any group wanted to come do a religiously themed holiday expression, we'd have to say yes. And we deal with that at City Hall. We typically, he hasn't been back for a while, but when I first started here, for the first 3 years, a gentleman from the Church of Satan would come in and say, "Hey, I want to put up a display." And we just say, as long as it's holiday themed, we'll put it out there. It's, if you sponsor it, we'll put it out there. And they never have. But that's typically what the city has to do. You have to treat everyone the same, religions and non-religions. And so what we've always said is it has to be holiday themed. So if it's holiday themed, then the answer is yes. And so in theory, if we had a dance group that said, we really want to do our show at the amphitheater during the North Pole, I'd say we should tell them yes. And we should pick a date by which people would need to apply for that, so we don't have people showing up the week before. But that's the biggest legal hurdle we have, is the potential for either a lawsuit saying it crosses a line, or the risk of having too many people wanting to get involved and there's just not enough time and space in the week to do it.
John, do we know why the county decided not to allow that out there? Was it a liability of injury? Was it a liability that you just described? Why did the county disallow the use of the facility? Was it parking? What was it?
So it wasn't parking, because they were holding it at the fairgrounds. My understanding from the people I talked to was it was a legality deal with the establishment clause, because it was only the Hunt family activity. And so the reason ours is a little different is that we don't just have the Hunt family there. We've got Santa Claus, we've got hot cocoa and candy canes and cookies and the menorah reindeer, and we've been trying to grow it bigger. And so that's what changes a little bit, but that is the risk, is that we could be sued. Typically in those situations, it's not a monetary penalty. It's just a, hey, you can't do this. But that doesn't mean that when it comes to the First Amendment, and particularly freedom of religion and the Establishment Clause, the cases are all over the place. And the Supreme Court rewrites the law. Every time a case comes to them, the Supreme Court rewrites the law.
So I missed this. Maybe Council Barker could give us some insight on this. The ability, if there's a medical emergency, with how things are organized and the traffic flow, do you feel comfortable you can get there in an emergency vehicle and take care of, if there's an emergency, if somebody has a heart attack down on the ground there, can you get there?
We'll get there.
You might have to use a helicopter or?
No, that's why when I was speaking with John,
Microphone.
I know. When I was speaking with John, the biggest issue is traffic. when you have traffic going both ways and then parking on both sides of the street, it just becomes a bottleneck and no one moves. So that's why I talked with the chief and we proposed, and we've got to get with PD and engineers and maybe one way in and out, and then you're eliminating half that traffic.
So at this point in time, if I hear you correctly, you're saying we need to make some change to make it safe.
On large events, yes.
Okay. Councilmember Watson?
But citizens aren't allowed to park on both sides of the street, right? Because of the neighborhood.
But they do. I mean, the first hour or first 45 minutes, they'll stay where they're supposed to. And then after that, it's a free for all. And so I've heard from some of the residents over there, they would rather the signs were gone, the no parking signs, as opposed to, the people breaking the law. And we have given warnings up there. I'm not sure we've ever issued a ticket or towed cars.
Well, if we were to change the traffic pattern and make it one way only, then would it be safer and possible? I guess is what my question is. Would it be possible to have the parking on both sides and then we wouldn't have to police it?
We could look at it. So this is where I get my code official. You're supposed to have 20 feet of clear driveway at all times. And so if you have parking on both sides of the street, and then one lane of cars, you now don't have 20 feet.
So when a fire truck comes down your street, it goes down the middle of the street and the cars are expected to get off. And so with all the parking, there's not a way for them to get off and out of the way, I think is the concern.
I mean, it'd be easier if there was a traffic flow pattern, but it would still be limited.
It'd be limited, yeah.
Yeah.
And we had the discussion, would only allow parking on one side of the street. But, I mean, it's all preliminary discussions without actually looking at it. There are changes that need to be made, though.
I think too, John, it might be worth you explaining to the council the difference between a city-sponsored event in regards to liability and what takes place. I mean, we can't get out of any liability if it's on our facility, but if it's a city-sponsored event, our liability coverage is in place versus them having to provide liability coverage to us to ensure that they're safe. Because if it's not a city-sponsored event or whatever the definition is, partnership or whatever, then we would expect people to give us certificates of insurance, because if somebody falls off that stage and gets hurt, right, the city's accepting the liability. So I think that comes into play too on when the council decides the definition of these events. I think we've already had one fairly substantial claim down in that area, which things are going to happen, but it's just the discussion we had before. Is this a county-sponsored event? Is it a city-sponsored event? Is it an individual-sponsored event? Because that has to do with liability, right?
Yeah, and anytime there's an injury at the park, at the amphitheater, the city will be sued, will be involved in that. The difference is on the different levels of participation. If the city isn't doing it, isn't involved at all, it's just a for rent facility, someone brings their family reunion in, then we would require them to provide some insurance, or we have the option through our insurance carrier for them to pay a little bit of money, and they're not falling under our insurance, but they're getting an additional coverage from the same company. And it's cheaper than if they go out and buy it on their own. But essentially, as the city's involvement gets less, meaning if it's not a fully city-sponsored event, then our liability goes down a little bit, because there's an additionally insured, not additionally insured, that's a different term, but another insurance getting involved or another policyholder getting involved. But we'll never be scot-free and clear of it. The big claim we had was actually someone tripping on the sidewalk, and it wasn't even tied to an event. It was just they were down there in the park and tripped and hurt themselves. And so there will always be liability. We'll never be able to get away from it. The only difference is the more private it becomes, the more insurance carriers are there to provide buffer to the city is probably the way to say it. But the ultimate liability we have is a city sponsored event in a city facility where, and we don't do this for the North Pole, but where we charge tickets. Because when you charge for entry, your liability goes up. There's just weird rules with stewardship over property and, you know, what you need to make sure people are aware of and can see. You know, if they're trespassing, then you don't need to let them know as much as if they buy a ticket to show up to your place. So does that answer the question, or did I just throw a ball of yarn at everyone and say, ha?
Made sense.
Okay. And then any other questions on this topic? And I should probably say there's no requirement, council, for us to continue doing the North Pole or continue involving the people who have been involved in it. Just, it's not, I do know that, you know, the staff likes the activity. It seems like there's good feedback, but if the council doesn't want to do it, you don't have to do it. There's no one who can force you.
John,
I thought it was awesome.
oh, go ahead, Councilmember Paul.
I thought it was awesome. I mean, I volunteered and helped to hand out cookies. My wife and I did that, and the amount of people and just, it was phenomenal. And it wasn't just from North Ogden, Pleasant View, Harrisville. There was a whole bunch of people from everywhere, and they came for that program. Because once it went away from Weaver County, everybody's like, where'd it go? So, I mean, if it's found a home in North Ogden, that'd be awesome. That's just my personal opinion.
I think, John, if I understood you correctly, we've actually historically looked at it as two separate events. The city-sponsored event was the Santa Claus, the area below, and then that was, but what we're talking about here is making it one event. Is that correct?
So we call the North Pole the city-sponsored event, and it includes the Hunt family activity, but the city doesn't put any money into it. The only thing the employees do is we open the door, and then we've even gone as far as to making them shovel off chairs and shovel sidewalks. We'll usually do the sidewalks, but if they want the chairs clear, then they have to sweep them off. Because we're trying to say, okay, the city is not supporting this any further than we are the menorah, for example. But that doesn't mean that there's not a question about it is in a big facility with lights and sound, and there's nothing else except for the light show that has sound. And so that's where people raise concerns, is it feels like the city's sponsoring the Hunt family, and what we're doing is sponsoring the event, and then they're sponsoring the sub show kind of independently, but it's not a clear black and white line in people's eyes.
Councilmember Severing?
I was just going to say, John, have we asked those guys to do an event insurance?
We
Would that kind of eliminate this city sponsored kind of a thing?
we haven't required them to, because it falls under the umbrella of the entire North Pole activity. But that's something that we can talk about in the future, but also we can talk about in 5 minutes, because that's the next topic, is kind of this 3-tiered sponsorship partnership.
Right.
idea.
So if we had them pick up an event policy, and we either have like a hold harmless, or we have additional insured on their policy, does it really matter whether it's city sponsored liability?
I mean, like I said, we will always have
Always gonna get in
liability
trouble.
because it's on our
potentially.
property, but it does provide an extra buffer there.
I don't think those policies are really that expensive, are they?
I'm going to get the number wrong, but I feel like we had a dance group that was coming in a recital, and they partnered with our current carrier and just got an additional policy. I think it was like 50 something bucks for the day. So it wasn't huge. It wasn't like $1,000, but I can tell you that those big events I'm chalk it up, I'm sure their insurance is more than $50, for example.
And John, I don't believe any of the participants are employees, because the other issue you have, just like when we have subcontractors come onto our property, we require them to provide workers' comp coverage, right? I don't know if they have any employees, but I guess what we're saying here is it's an event that we want to continue, but we want to make sure that we're limiting the city's liability as much as possible without being total jerks, right?
Mhm.
And making sure we're complying with which seems like Morgan's doing with the gathering permit, that we have, I think if it's more than 500 people, we have to have police presence, or anyway, we have some rules that we just need to make sure we're,
Hmm.
whatever those are, that we're following and in there. And, you know, I think the council just needs to know as part of the budgeting process, because if it is going to be a city sponsored event, we're going to have officers there. We just need to know as part of the budgeting process what that is.
Yeah.
So, okay, anything else you need, John, or any other council comments? Councilmember Dalpaz?
Kind of on topic, but we've had a resident that has commented 2 or 3 times that we should get trees planted around
Right.
the Santa's house. Could we do that this summer?
Yeah,
That'd be great.
I think the plan is to do it as part of our Arbor Day celebration. The last year we did the same exact tree configuration as we did the year before. And so they're comfortable installing little pine trees that they'll grow a little bit bigger, but they're trying to find kind of dwarf pine trees that won't get so tall. They just throw needles and ruin the grass.
That'd be awesome.
Okay. John, what else do you need from the council this evening
On this item,
on this item? We'll move to the next item.
I think just it would be good as we finalize the budget process and we talk about the events to make an official decision on if we're moving forward with it. But that'll delve into our next topic too.
Okay, you keep talking about the next topic, so let's move to that.
Okay. So this council is the discussion for the back to the sponsorships. And the idea being that this is a discussion we started in February and focusing on what does the city want to participate in and in what ways. And what I did first off on the staff report is I made a list of every group I could think of that we've been involved or supported. And it's a lot. It really, and this is not even all of them, but there's the Kiwanis, the Northview Seniors, the Civic League, North Ogden Elementary School, Pineview, the Just a Break Foundation, which does the Chalk It Up Festival, the Major Brent Taylor Foundation, Jerry Hadley Real Estate, Best Realty, Hunt Family, Barn Golf Course, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, specifically that's up at McGriff Park, the Junior Posse Rodeo, Northview Fire District. They sometimes get to use our rooms for free. SWAT Soccer, I think probably qualifies as that. That's the local youth soccer group. The Weber Drug Task Force, the CERT, and then I'm sure I've missed others. But as I started expanding the list, I felt like we really support a lot of groups, and most of the support is free use of facilities. Kiwanis, the Junior Posse Rodeo, Northview Fire District, a lot of those, it's just kind of a, hey, if you need a room, we've got it for you. Kiwanis does pretty regular, and Northview Seniors obviously do it pretty regular. They use a facility twice a month, or Northview daily. And so then I started saying, well, how do we categorize these to provide some definition and some clarification? And this is where I need some help with the council tonight, is to help refine, is 3 categories enough for the council or for the city to consider? And are these type of activities in the right categories? And so I've just called them sponsored, partnered, and supported. And the idea is that the sponsored events would be the places where city puts money and has the greatest legal liability, for injuries, because we're having employees involved quite heavily. And there may be a formal contract. A good example is with Cherry Days and it moving to a 501c3 potentially with the discussion we had last time. I think that we would execute a contract with that group and say the city's still sponsoring this and providing these things, but the 501c3 is providing these services in exchange for, and that might be the difference between the partnership and the sponsorship on Cherry Days. Partnered activities would be where we're letting them use equipment or facilities for free. Employees may help set up and clean up, but they're not actually involved in the operation of the event. It helps us with our liability, meaning there's a little less. And this might be a conversation about, should we require the partner to have insurance, or do they let them fall under the city insurance? And I think my recommendation, since I've written this staff report and thought about it, is I think it's good to have them have their insurance, because that again kind of helps to differentiate the separation on what it is. And then the last one is the city supported activities, and these would just be at a discount. So a good example of that is SWAT soccer. They use all our parks all summer long, and I'm fairly confident, based on my understanding of the situation, that they are not paying the cost it takes to keep that park green and operating. But they are paying some, or they're expected to pay some. But I think it's not, I mean, it does not cover the cost that it takes to keep a park up and running for the summer. And so in those, I think and I know like SWAT does have their own insurance that they carry, that's part of what their fees cover. But what I need from the council on this tonight, and obviously the discussion doesn't have to finalize tonight, but is that enough categories and is that enough distinction that then we can figure out a process on how each group will apply to the council to fall into one of these categories? And then the second question is, does the council want to review those annually, or do they want to say, hey, once you're on the list, you're on the list? And that's the way we've typically operated. Kiwanis got approval, who knows when, to use the facility, and staff just keep saying, yep, you can use it for free because you used it for free last year. So those are kind of the two questions I need answered tonight. Not tonight, but at some point.
Hey, John, so you mentioned the SWAT soccer, and you said, I think they have their own insurance. Do we not get a copy of that?
They do have their own insurance.
But do we get a copy of insurance and keep it on record? So, or, in some cases, we might want to become an additional named insured, or?
I don't believe they give us a copy, but I think but we can require it.
Well, if we're trying to limit our liability in those areas, it seems like that would be prudent to do if we decide that's whatever category it fits into, them having their own insurance.
Yeah.
Well, personally, myself, coming from a little bit of insurance background, I would like to see, whether it's city sponsored, partnered, or supported, that we have some kind of event policy in place, whether it's some kind of a rider where they pay and then it's somewhat of an endorsement on our policy, or whether they actually provide a policy with us being listed as an additional insured. Myself.
And I think the other thing too, I'll go ahead, Councilmember Dalpas.
Well, I was just gonna throw out a couple examples to make sure I understand it. So the Kiwanis group using the senior center for meetings, for example. So we're saying we would potentially, under one of these categories, be saying you can use it for free, but we want you guys to have an insurance policy in case someone trips and falls. And
more in particular, a good example is they do our breakfast for Cherry Days, and they don't provide insurance for that. They just fall under the Cherry Days insurance.
I think this, go ahead, Councilmember Watson.
Sorry. I was just gonna say, so the city sponsored events, maybe in that section, we could say that the insurance is included from the city, but the other two, they have to provide their own insurance, or you're recommending that all of them need to bring their own insurance?
It depends. So a good example is the trunk or treat is really a city activity with Jared Hadley Real Estate as a heavily involved partner, or a heavily involved co-sponsor. And so it could go either way. I do know, going back to the Kiwanis question, that Kiwanis National has insurance that filters down. So getting us listed on their policy would be difficult, but there is a policy there that covers event activities and events that they fall under, because they pay $1.50 a month per member back to corporate Kiwanis which covers that kind of stuff.
My personal opinion is that the way that things have been going in the recent past is that we are doing away with more of the city sole responsibility events. City does the whole event, has no sponsors, and we have an events coordinator leading that and executing that. We have been going away from that. And so if we continue that way, I feel like we need to have an option where we can have a sponsor come in and help do an event for us where we have a lot of benefit. And the alternative is that we would pay for everything. And so we want to encourage that event to happen. If it's a city sponsored event like North Pole, like the trunk or treat, there's the fewest hoops that these sponsors have to go through to be able to throw an event for us at almost no cost to us. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, if we want to have this benefit as a city, and try to persuade people to come in as these sponsors and to do this for us, instead of doing it ourselves, I would think that we need to encourage and support and foster that to happen. And so if that means that they have their own insurance, great. But if they don't have their own insurance and they're willing to do this for us, I don't know. I feel like we should show support, my opinion.
I think on a city-sponsored event, it makes sense to put them under our insurance, so they don't have to jump through that hoop. But let me just go back to, because this also becomes a budget issue. This started, if you'll recall, about the $5,000 that was given to Chalk It Up. And the question is who decides who we're going to give money to and who we're not going to give money to? I think the council needs to decide that, because then it becomes a budget issue, right? Where does the money going to come from to do that? I think we're all in agreements that, the city is interested in having city-sponsored activities to bring the community together. I think I'm hearing that. So it comes back to what is entailed with a city-sponsored event or a whatever. Do we then make a contribution to an outside entity? Because that's kind of what started generating this whole discussion. And I think Councilmember Pulver and Councilmember Dalpaz came back with some quotes out of the Utah League of Cities and Towns training book. So when you look at these three categories, and I'm not saying the decision needs to be made tonight, but what does that entail? Does that entail making a contribution to an entity that's doing something in the city out of city budget? Or if that's the case, what are the parameters? I believe that when you decide on these three categories, there needs to be very distinct definition of what that is, and whoever meets those falls into that category, whatever it is, so that we have some degree of consistency. But it does come down to somewhat budgeting. I don't know, John, what we make, like the YCC. I know there's a contribution that's been made there historically. I know she came and made a presentation to WACOG, and basically, is that going to go to each city and ask them for money? There's only like 3 cities that have been doing that, as I think as she reported, but the amount she'll be asking for is like double. That doesn't mean she'll get it, but that's what she's kind of assigned a city based upon usage, an amount to fund the YCC. But there's those type of things that I think the council needs to decide what's going to go into the budget and what constitutes their willingness to do that under a definition, because I think then you don't have to get into the pick and choose, right? Councilmember Dalpaz.
Yeah, I think where you're going is good. That is the reason that I had brought it up before, was Chalk It Up, for example, is, we're giving a monetary contribution, and the book that you are referring to is the Utah League of Cities and Towns. I believe it's the Power and Privileges book or guidebook, something like that. Powers and Duties. Yes, there you go. Chris has it there. Well, it specifically said that it's it can be a questionable thing to give money to outside organizations. Can't remember the wording, but so I would recommend that we just completely stay away from that. The only caveat is I don't know how would we handle Cherry Days, you know, because we have talked about Cherry Days. Their committee setting up a 501c3 and us contributing. And maybe that's different because it's more of everyone has always known that Cherry Days is a city sponsored event. But I just wonder if that raises any question there. But I just think overall, we just do away with any contributions to, well, I guess that's what's hard is YCC and the Children's Justice Center, things like that. I mean, they kind of seem like a no-brainer to me because they provide a service back to our community, you know, for those that are in need. But for other stuff that can't as well be defined, I think we should stay away from.
I think one of the things we talked about is having some part of the definition if it contributes to public safety. For instance, you know, the chief flat out said they'd have a hard time with some convictions without the Children's Justice Center and getting perpetrators off the street, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think with the YCC, for instance, you have domestic violence issues where even an increased burden is being placed on public safety officers to ask certain questions and kind of make an evaluation and how do they get people, you know, in a safe place to prevent, you know, more difficult actions. So it becomes complicated, but I guess the situation is, as we look at these three categories that John has identified, that we define what those are. And if the council's in agreement that, you know, money should only be contributed to where there's identified public safety issue, that could be in the definition of which category you're in. I think it'd probably be, you know, hard, but I would encourage each of you to kind of be thinking about that and say, you know, what is the definition of this and what does it mean? And is the city, you know, budgeting for some of these things? We know we have some money set aside now, but I think it should be probably identified to be used for those type of things to generate the goal that we're trying to accomplish. It's very difficult in today's world, frankly, without making some type of investment, whatever that is, to get things successful. But, you know, the council needs to know what that is and what they're willing to do, and under what circumstances they're willing to do that. Because what do we have, John? I think you mentioned 140 or is it 129,000 set aside budgeted for activities in the city.
Yeah, that's the budget for the
Whatever that was
recreation
called.
and events, or not rec, but yeah, that's in our budget for that department.
And some of it's fixed costs. I mean, it's an allocation of a portion of the salary that we'd still have to have somebody. So it's not all incremental by any means, but I would encourage you, council, to kind of, you know, if that's the position that Council Member Dalpaz and Council Member have talked about, that needs to be incorporated so that people know that, so that the expectation is not to come to the council and request those type of situations. If you recall, we had the 4-H group come, right? And they were able to raise the money outside of the city, but those are the type of things that might help in the definitions you come up with. Councilmember Watson?
So I don't disagree with you, Mayor. I just wonder if it would make it more clear to say that for certain events that are city sponsored, like Cherry Days or the Trunk or Treat, that we aren't handing Cherry Days money to just pocket or take home or spend however they want, but we are paying for their receipts or reimbursing the expenses that we improve. And so that might be categorized differently than if we want to give to the 4-H company, because the 4-H group may not provide a public safety for our community. And it also may not be a city sponsored event that we've approved how they spend their money. So I just feel like, to me, it feels different when we hand money to Cherry Days or to the Trunk or Treat than if we were to hand money to 4-H, because
Yeah.
we've approved them as city sponsored events.
that makes sense. I still think, and John, you're going to have to define this for us. What the council's obligation anytime they authorize the expenditure of public funds, what their involvement has to be. Because that could complement, not complement, what am I?
Complicate.
Complicate some of these issues.
A good example of that is we currently have a third party that we contract with for our event management and, operation. And we don't ask for an accounting of how many hours do you spend. We just kind of say, okay, we have a contract and you do this work and we pay you this much. And in theory, on cherry days, you can go the two directions. One is we'll pay you based on receipts, or the other is this is what we expect. And we could create a contract that says we want a parade, we want fireworks, we want an event with food and vendors, and we will give you this much money. Go forth and do it. But and so it's a little bit based on the different organizations. With the trunk or treat, for example, Ryan Hadley technically gives us money. So the candy that we give out at the city, Jared Hadley, with too many Hadleys, the money or the candy we give out at the city booths is paid for by Jared Hadley. We build our own booths with city funds, and then we have employee time there. I think that event, if you include Morgan's time, we're spending $6,000, maybe $7,000, and then Jared Hadley's putting in probably $3,000 to $4,000 himself, because at least 1,500 of it he's giving to us, and then he does all the advertising. Anyways, so it might make sense to, instead of saying that sponsors are people that we give money to, because I don't know that we'd say we're sponsoring the YCC, but maybe we should make another category that's a donation category that says, hey, when we're supporting a group like this that's public safety related, then we're gonna do it this way and articulate it this way.
Could you stick it in the police fund to kind of articulate that fact?
Yeah, I think we could have it come out of the police as a donations, but one thing, and what kind of started this all, was how do we make sure that people are applying and we're in the right time, in the right way? Initially when we start this, we thought, oh, maybe we'll have 15 people apply and we want to make sure it goes everywhere. And as we start talking about public safety, we might only be talking about the YCC, because the CJC, we did a kind of a capital donation, but they are not expecting annual donations from us at this point. The YCC, I don't say they're expecting it, but they're asking for it annually.
And that's more of a victim advocate. And that's literally one of the line items in the police budget is victim advocacy. So I would think it's almost in the city's best interest, as opposed to a donation. It's they use the service, right?
Yeah, the people most at risk, it gives them a place to stay, usually with their kids, obviously if they have kids, as opposed to forcing them to go back into a hostile environment, and potentially it turns into a worse event than the reason that they left in the first place.
Well, John, maybe I could ask if there's a council member that's interested in helping define these three categories. It could be brought back to the council for further discussion. Is there a council member that would be interested in working with John to help kind of further define these things and then bring it back to the council? Would that be?
I can help do that.
Okay, so we have Councilmember Pulver.
Okay.
I'm surely happy to help too. So why don't we do that then? Let's further refine. Are we okay with these three categories that John has identified, and then we'll seek further definition?
I did have one question. We kind of got off track, so I didn't want to screw up what Councilman Delpaz was saying, but who can legally obligate the city to do, I don't know, for these events? Is there a specific, I don't say hierarchy, but I mean, is it the city council that is, I guess, who's the?
Well, I guess it's two-step. First, the council approves the expenditure of any money in the budget, right?
Okay.
And once that's approved, and correct me again, John, if I'm wrong, is that John is the city manager,
It's legally, okay.
has the ability to obligate the city up to $25,000 within the budget.
With, in the category that was approved, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
within the budget. And anything over that, I think, has historically gone to the mayor.
Yeah, I think it's mayor up to 50.
Then over that comes to the council.
But I guess I think I got that part, but I think what I'm saying is when I say obligate, meaning that if we're putting ourselves into like we were talking about, that, insurance or not insurance, I mean, is that what we're basically trying to identify as how?
Yeah,
gonna-
what qualifications have to
Okay.
be met in the definition? And once all those qualifications are met, then that's why we have the city manager. But
Okay.
I think it's the council's responsibility to identify what qualifies people for those. And I think, in a situation of this nature, John can always come back to the council and say, this is really close. But if they meet those qualifications, I think we have an obligation to be consistent in the qualifications for that. But I think once those things are defined, approved by the council, and the budget set in place, then that's why we have a city manager, is to execute those things. And I think it's always good to communicate, let the council know what's going on with those things, but that's kind of how it's set. You can always change that if you want, but that's the current thing now. A department head can change a line item within a budget, I think, as long as they don't overexpend their budget up to 5,000. Is that right, John?
Right.
But if it's over that, then they have to come to John and get approval.
So is the 501(c) something that we need to wind into this, or is that a separate animal?
So a good example is under the supported, it says buildings and parks are used at a discount. And in our fee schedule, it says, hey, if you're a nonprofit, then you get the discount. And so it's a little weird across the three categories, because in a sponsored activity, we wouldn't necessarily expect the council to approve all of the people who might help us sponsor, right? So the Charity Days Committee is going to go out and raise $60,000-$70,000, and they're not going to ask the council if we're okay taking the money from them. But on the partnered activities, it might make more sense because there's no fee for the building, but now the city is still, the name's tied into it, but we don't have as much control, that maybe those do need to come to the council for approval. And we say, hey, if it's a partnered activity, then we want you to be on the approved council list.
And I think it's important too, whether it's a city sponsored or a partnered event, the public looks at that as our event. And we need to know at least what's going on, so that we don't, have some outrageous thing happen and then we're kind of looked at as well. So I don't think we need to make it really difficult, but I think it's just courtesy to inform the council what the event's going to be. So that,
Yeah, and I think, Mayor, there's opportunity there with, lots of companies have approved supplier lists that you don't have to ask a question about because you vetted them already. And I think that's maybe what John or somebody was saying, that, if it's XYZ, then yep, we can use them.
yeah, if
So,
it meets the definition and they fit into that category. However, we've tried to be very neutral and not have political events, quote, that are sponsored by the city, that, we're not favoring one political party over another. So I think it's important to know that we're not getting ourselves into that inadvertently, that we know here's what we're sponsoring.
what they're doing, yeah.
I don't think we want to get into managing all that stuff, but I think it's just courtesy to know, what's happening there. So I think those are some things that probably would be on the checklist. But let's, the reason I think that Cherry Days wants to go with the 501(c)(3), and this is another thing, we've given them the assignment, right? But then we want to get in the middle of everything that happens. We want to meddle in that. But if we outline, like John said, here's what we want, then we should stay out of that and let them run with what we've assigned them to do. It's very frustrating to give somebody an assignment but no authority, right? If you give them the accountability, they got to have kind of the authority. That doesn't mean we shouldn't oversee the monetary things where we're making that, but just some things to think about. So Councilmember Pulver, will look forward to you working with Mr. Call and coming back to the council with some definitions of these three categories, if the council's all right with those categories.
And just a little small anecdote to that is that we're not telling them how to fold the towels. You just want them folded in. That's why I tell my wife.
We just want to know
It's
we have
folded and it's
towels.
in the closet. Don't worry, it's not folded correctly. Well, it's not my.
We just want to know we have towels available. right?
Exactly.
Okay, Councilmember Watson.
Similar along those lines, I think that it would make things more streamlined and efficient. If we don't have these groups that we've already partnered with have to come back for approval every year. I am completely in favor of, the trunk or treat event to keep going and to SWAT to keep using the soccer fields and to not have to hang on that every year, wondering if they will be able to use the soccer fields again. I would say that if they've been approved once, maybe they come back every 5 or 10 years, or maybe even just when necessary, if necessary.
Yeah, I would say only if they fall out of meeting the qualifications, right?
Sure.
As long as they're meeting the qualifications. I think it's good for John to give us an annual report of what's taking place. But yeah, I don't think we want to get into coming back with the approval each and every year, but we do want to make sure that they're still meeting the qualifications. Okay, anything else, John or council, you need from us this evening? All right, we'll look forward to, what time frame do you think you're going to need to, next week, Councilmember Pulver, you can come back with this? How much time? What's the goal?
Looking at me? Oh, let's try to. lean
I
back
just
to
want to,
John.
I just don't want to leave this hanging out there too
No,
long.
it won't. Yeah, I've been taking copious stuff and I've been jibber jabbering with other people too. So
Okay, so
week. Let's see. What's the next one? Next
Uh,
week is 2
it-
weeks.
It'd be the 23rd. Next week it'd be hard to get it on the agenda because
Yeah.
we need it done in 24 hours, but the
just
23rd.
in the next month, let's plan on you having
Then we
it
have the
come back.
going down to St. George. Okay.
So it'd be the 23rd or the 14th of May.
Yeah.
That'd be the next regular meeting after that.
Okay. All right. Anything else on that? All right, then we'll move on then to public comments. If anyone would like to comment, now would be the time. Just as a reminder, come up to the podium here. State your name and if you're a resident of North Ogden. And John, if you see anyone online, please let us know. Anyone?
I feel tricked. Anyone? Kevin Burns, North Ogden. The discussion about a successful amphitheater. I would love to see the amphitheater be a success. But in our spare time, we do our hobbies. And I think in order for the amphitheater to be a success, it's going to be a grind. And to try to find a group of employees that in their spare time can make some phone calls and put some plans together. I just don't see that being as successful because anything that we're going to be successful at is a grind. It is a daily, it's work. And having had the opportunity to participate in a few events and organize a few events, it's work. And I'm not a business owner, but I know some successful business owners and they grind. It is day in and day out, their blood, sweat, and tears into those businesses. And I believe the amphitheater, the city in general, is it's a business. And if anyone would like to argue the work of a business, I turn to Mayor Berube. I think he ran a business for a day or two. He might know a little bit about the grind. So that was the part that came to mind as I sat out here tonight, and just the work, the real work that has to go into it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. that a hand raised out there, John?
Yep, we do have Susan Kilborn's hand raised. Oh,
Okay.
wrong mouse. Okay, there we go.
I saw you, Meryl. Yes, Susan Kilborn here. Just a couple of things. First of all, if memory serves me, concerning the parking on the streets around the amphitheater, that was not an issue that the neighborhood brought up. That was a safety issue. And the second thing is my brain is swimming with all kinds of ideas about the amphitheater. And Mr. Mayor, I have selected you as the lucky person that I'm going to download my ideas on. So when you get them, you can decide what you want to do with them or who you want me to connect with. But I've got some good ideas. And that's
Fantastic. We're always open to good ideas.
all. And I've got them. I'm your gal.
All right. Well, maybe we know who to hire.
Oh, no. I have a job that pays way more better than you guys can afford. You can't afford me.
That's what HH says.
He's laughing.
All
Okay,
right.
have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, we'll move on to item number 9 then. Any staff comments? All right, Ryan.
I just wanted to remind you guys, Chris Pulver, when you're going to put your agenda item request in, this is a good time to remind everybody to use the city website Google form that I've created. It allows me to have a spreadsheet so that I can track those, keep on top of them. So friendly reminder, the end.
Okay, thank you. Any further council comments? All right, well, I'd look for a motion to adjourn the meeting then.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Councilmember Watson.